So welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. It's March, but it's feeling quite chilly over here in the UK. As I'm British, I always like to bring up the weather. But welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. So you're always welcome here. So tonight, we've got the pleasure of Sonya Siderova joining us. And I don't actually know Sonya, but what inspired me to approach her was the fact that I've seen lots of videos on LinkedIn. And I love that she's putting herself out there. I'm loving her content that she's giving. I'm loving that she's a boss lady. She's a CEO of Nave. And I really admire that. And I really love the product Nave as well, because I'm all about the data and the insights and all of those lovely things. So what is not to like about her, and why would I not want to invite her to the Kanban Coaching Exchange? So let's give her a very warm welcome. Welcome to the Kanban Exchange, Sonya. Virtual round of applause.
Thank you very much, guys. Such an amazing introduction. Thank you so much, Helen. Okay, so I think we're ready to get started. I'm going to share my screen now with you guys, and then let's get it going. All right. So, hello, everyone. I'm really glad that you decided to join us today. My name is Sonya. I'm the founder and CEO of Nave, and we help product engineering teams deliver on their commitments and optimize the processes behind building software. And today, I would like to talk about one of my most favorite topics: how to make reliable project forecasts. All right, so if you're ready, then we can get started. I hear my clients and plenty of stakeholders ask this question all the time. How much time will this take? Or when will you be done? So coming up with the delivery date of a project certainly can be challenging, especially if you don't have the means to make reliable decisions at your disposal. So where does the problem come from? The most common approach to project planning suggests that the team should sit down together, go through the individual work items, and then estimate the effort needed to complete each item, either in hours or story points. And then the times are accumulated and a margin is added on top of the total sum in order to account for any unanticipated events. And the result looks something like: we will need approximately 10 weeks to deliver, or we'll need about 5 sprints to complete the work. But what's the chance of meeting that commitment? Let me ask you a question. Would you commit to delivering in 5 sprints if you knew there was only a 20% chance of meeting that deadline? That's certainly something I don't recommend doing. And apart from being tremendously time and effort consuming, the main problem with this approach is that it's just not reliable. And here are just a few reasons why these methods are fragile. Firstly, estimating the effort time required to complete your work items is a prediction based on guesswork, intuition, or good feeling. It doesn't use historical facts. It doesn't use past performance data to produce accurate results. Secondly, by evaluating the actual scope of the work, you are ignoring one of the major sources of inefficiency and delays: the waiting time in your system. Your effort time doesn't include the waiting time in your process, which, by the way, usually represents anything from 60 to 99% of your delivery times. Remember this stat: the waiting time in your process represents anything between 60% and 90% of your delivery times. Evaluating the actual scope of your work is just not enough to provide a reliable delivery commitment. Your delivery time will always exceed your effort time. And last, but certainly not least, commitments based on effort come as a single value and thinking deterministically about the future is simply insufficient. There is always more than one possible outcome that might happen in the future. Now, I would like to kick this off with a story. Every morning, I have to drive my kids to school. Well, it's not really a school, it's more like a kindergarten within the same building as the primary school. And they have the standard bell rings, classes, breaks in between. It really feels like school. And I find it awesome because when my daughter started first grade, the whole experience was so much smoother. So the first class starts at 8:45. And if you're not there on time, they close the main doors and you just cannot get in anymore. So it's crucial for me to get there before 8:45. Otherwise, I have to look after two little kids for the whole day, which you know what this means, right? It means that I won't be able to do anything else. So, and even though our school is pretty close, it's about 10 kilometers away from our house, it can take me anything from 10 to 40 minutes to get there, depending on whether or not there is construction work or a local street market taking place, for example. And I even didn't make it once because there was a major car incident and the traffic was horrible. My point is, I never know exactly how long it will take to reach my destination. The outcome will often be different, and the only thing I can do to achieve my goal is to make sure I leave home early enough to have a sufficient high level of confidence that I will arrive on time. You can never have 100% certainty about what will happen in the future. There are always multiple scenarios that may occur. There is no model that produces a single certain outcome that guarantees you will achieve your goal. The exact same principle applies when it comes to making delivery commitments. You can never have 100% certainty about what will happen in the future. Every time you say something like, we will deliver this project in 2 months, and you don't provide any information related to the certainty level of achieving your goal, you are making deterministic estimate. Let me ask you something. Can we predict the exact delivery date of our projects despite the unpredictability of knowledge work? And exact is the key word here. Are we capable of predicting the exact time a feature will take to go through the whole process while maintaining the rest of the work in progress at the same time? Is it possible to predict that there won't be any additional work coming in between, any defects, dependencies, bottlenecks, blockers that might cause a delay? There are two approaches to making delivery predictions: a deterministic estimate and a probabilistic forecast. What's the difference? Estimates are predictions based on guesswork, judgment, intuition, or gut feeling. The prediction is delivered as a single value. It could be a date or a number of hours, days, or story points, for example. An estimate doesn't involve any probability of its occurrence. When you estimate your delivery, you don't know whether there is a 20% chance or 50% chance or 80% chance of meeting your commitment. And the biggest problem with deterministic estimations is that we assume we know what will happen in the future with 100% certainty upfront. Forecasts, on the other hand, are based on historical performance data. The prediction is communicated as a range of values and the probability of those values occurring. Producing probabilistic forecasts is the first step towards making an objective decision about when you will deliver your project or how much work your team can handle during your next release. So, how can we make reliable probabilistic forecasts about our projects when there is so much uncertainty that we have to deal with? The secret lies in accepting that there is more than one possible result that may happen in the future and managing that uncertainty effectively. And let me make this clear. There is a need to clearly differentiate between the analysis process and the forecasting process during your project planning. The main goal of the analysis process is to gain an understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. During the analysis, you must unambiguously define the what and why. And if your team starts arguing whether something is 5 points or 8 points during the analysis process, that's a red flag. That's the realm of the forecasting process. During the analysis, the actual conversation behind what needs to be done is the most important thing. So the main goal of the forecasting process is to provide a reliable delivery commitment, and ideally, you shouldn't spend more than a couple of minutes doing so. The tools provide these answers for us already. So here, the only question is, what's the confidence level we're willing to live with? So let's focus on the forecasting part of this process. Now, to provide a reliable release commitment, you need to communicate the range of delivery dates you can hit together with the probabilities that come with it. And your commitment should look something like, we expect to deliver this project before the 5th of March, and we are 85% certain that we can achieve this goal. We are saying, another question for you, are we saying that we will deliver exactly on the 5th of March? No, we aren't. What we're saying here is that we will probably finish earlier, but it won't be later than the 5th of March, and there is an 85% probability that we'll keep our promise. Pay attention to the language we use here. It may seem to be a simple wording change, but it will have significant implications. Every time you provide the delivery commitment, ask yourself, what's the chance of meeting that goal? And if the approach you use to make delivery predictions doesn't enable you to quantify that probability, it's certainly worth considering an alternative. Here is my main message. The main purpose of making estimations is to manage risks effectively. There is always risk involved, and the most effective approach to managing realistic expectations is to quantify that risk by assessing the probability of achieving your goals. Every delivery prediction should communicate the risk associated with it. Now, how can we quantify that risk? The best predictor of your future is your past. And the best predictor of your future behavior is your past behavior. More often than not, your past is going to reflect the future, especially if you are in control of your management practices. And there is a straightforward technique that will enable you to come up with an accurate project delivery commitment without spending any extra time and effort. That's the realm of probabilistic forecasting. You no longer have to evaluate your work items in terms of hours or story points. What you actually need to do is look into your past performance and analyze it to produce probabilistic outcomes. And there is a tool at your disposal that will enable you to produce forecasts in just a couple of minutes. That tool is called the Monte Carlo simulation. Now, when determining the delivery date of your project, we use Monte Carlo simulations to come up with a range of commitments and the probabilities that come with each of them. The simulation relies on a large number of random trials based on your historical performance data to predict your throughput for a future time frame. Pay attention to this. And if you're multitasking, please come back to me. Throughput is the number of items completed in a certain time period. It represents your historical data and it accounts for all the variability in your system, including the effort time plus the waiting time in your workflow. And Monte Carlo simulations use your historical throughput. In the simulation, you define the start date here and then the number of items, which is the scope of your project, and the simulation will provide a range of possibilities, a range of possible outcomes, and the probability that comes with each of them. It will use the throughput of a random day in the past to simulate how many work items are likely to get done on any date in the future. Now, this is a screenshot of our Kanban Analytics suite. And in this simulation on September 10th, here, you had about 2 tasks. And the simulation takes that number and assumes that this is how many work items will be completed on November 1st. Then, to project the probable throughput of November 2nd, it takes the throughput of another random day in the past, and so on and so on. Then the simulation is repeated tens of thousands of times before the results are presented in the form of a probability distribution with percentiles increasing from left to right. Here, in this specific simulation, we set the scope of 44 tasks and stated that we want to start working on the project on November 1st. The simulation tells us that there is an 85% chance, 85% probability that we can finish that scope before the 19th of April. So the further you go in time, the greater the certainty of completing the projected outcome. Now, you can commit to project scope, delivery time, or quality, but not to all three. So my advice would be to pick time and quality and keep the scope flexible. The main benefit of using Monte Carlo simulations is that the method clearly defines the risks associated with certain outcomes. Here, the percentile lines on the distribution, 50%, 70%, 85, 95, 98%, they communicate the risk you're managing. The probabilities that the simulation produces quantify that risk in terms of percentages. So the question is no longer how many items you can complete before the next release. The question now is, how much risk are you willing to take? If you plan with less confidence, let's say you commit to delivering before the 27th of March, which points to the 50th percentile, which is, by the way, the same confidence level that comes with flipping a coin, you really ought to ask yourself whether you want to manage that level of risk. And I want you to think about project planning as gambling. Guess where the name of Monte Carlo comes from? The number of items we could supposedly deliver is higher at the lower confidence level. But how much risk do you want to take? Now, during our project planning process, we want to mitigate the risk as much as we can. 50% certainty is very, very low. So ideally, you should be working with 70, 85, or even 95% certainty when you're making your commitments. And if you look here into the farmost right sidebar column on the Monte Carlo simulation, you will see that the probability is greater than 99%. Remember, there is no such thing as 100% certainty that something will happen in the future. Your stakeholders want to be as confident as possible that you will deliver on your commitments, and they want to reduce the risk of failure as much as they can. To help them understand that concept easily, communicate your project plan in terms of risk. This is the language they understand. And if you commit to the delivery date on the 50th percentile, you will be wrong 1 out of every 2 times. If you commit to the date on the 85th percentile, you will be wrong 1 out of every 7 times. If you go for the 95th percentile, the risk of failure drops down to 1 out of 20 times. That's how you manage realistic expectations and plan your project in the most effective manner. What happens if you don't manage to meet your commitment? Does it mean your forecasts don't work? No, because if you've committed to the 85th percentile, there is still a 15% chance of not making it. You just ended up in this 15%. Always remember, there is no model that provides 100% certainty that we can achieve something. We can only commit with high confidence. The higher the confidence, the smaller the chance of failure. Now, guys, I have some tough love for you. The fact that you've come up with an initial delivery commitment doesn't mean that your job is done. The initial project planning phase is just that, an initial delivery prediction. It's just the beginning. Don't fall into the trap of assuming that everything will go as planned. On the contrary, your work has just begun. Now, let's take a step back. Just because you have 44 stories in your backlog, this doesn't mean that these exact 44 stories will be delivered before the date you've committed. That's not what the Monte Carlo simulation is telling you. What the simulation is telling you is, if you have 44 items, they will be done before the 19th of April, and there is an 85% certainty that you achieve that goal. Remember, during your initial project planning stage, you still only have a high-level understanding of your work items. Once you initiate your project, you'll probably split your stories. Some of them will drop off, more will be added. You'll discover defects, and additional work will come in between. The secret here is that you can take any 44 items you want, and the simulation Monte Carlo produces will still be valid. Once you begin your work and start delivering results, you should continuously reevaluate your forecast and adjust your course accordingly. You need to look into your plan from a continuous perspective and decide how best to fill the spots for these 44 items over time. Now, let me tell you another story. My husband and I moved to Belgium about 10 years ago. And I'll always remember the Belgian Red Devils playing at the FIFA World Cup back in 2018. It was pre-COVID time. There were thousands of people watching the game on a big screen in the center of our town, drinking beer, singing, dancing, and bursting into cheers every time we scored. And we were watching the game against France. And if you're a football fan, you probably know all of these websites that give you the probability of how a game will end. Gosh, I was checking out the forecast every 2 minutes. So the approach that these websites use is really, really smart. As the game progresses and teams score or don't score, the chance of your team winning will change as well. So every time a new event happens, the model is updated and a new prediction of how the game will end takes place. Now, imagine you are a coach of a team and you observe the probability of your team winning going down. If that's the case, you would probably want to make some changes, right? Switch the positions of certain players, let new players enter the game, or swap the initial strategy altogether to increase your chances of winning. Either way, when provided with that information, it would be simply unreasonable not to make any changes. Your tactics have to adjust based on the new information you're gathering. And this is a classic example of continuous forecasting. Once you have your initial forecast, you need to continuously reevaluate it and adjust your course accordingly. Your forecast will change as you deliver more work. Remember, we used our past throughput in the Monte Carlo simulation. Your throughput will vary based on any changes in the scope, your team, or the efficiency of your workflow. All these factors will affect the base you use to perform your initial prediction. That's why continuous forecasting is essential. To be able to deliver on your commitment, you need to make sure that you have your finger on the pulse of the work. And I've said this many times already, but I just can't emphasize this enough. When we talk about making delivery predictions, we need to acknowledge that there are many possible scenarios that could occur in the future. And probably the biggest advantage of using the Monte Carlo method is the fact that it produces a range of outcomes and the probabilities associated with each of them. It enables us to think about our commitments in terms of the risk we're willing to take. Now, let's put this strategy into action. Let's go back to our initial example. So if we say that, hypothetically, our project started on November 1st, and then we have 44 items in our backlog, and we are committed to delivering the work before the 19th of April. That outcome comes with an 85% certainty of meeting our goal. So I want to show you something that we call the release tracking dashboard. Here we have the start date of our project, the day's date, and then our planned release date, which is 19th of April. The scope is 44 items, and the probability percentage of us meeting our goal is initially set to 85%. We also have the rest of the probabilities here. We have that come with our forecast. We have like the 30%, 50, 70, 85, 95, 98. This is our starting point. This is the initial forecast that we've made at the very beginning of our project, which is November 1st. Our goal is to track that release tracking dashboard every 2 weeks. Now, from here on, we're going to evaluate our progress on a regular basis. So we started working on November 1st, and then we deliver work. As we deliver work, we want to apply the continuous forecasting strategy to actually reevaluate our initial commitment. So we run the simulation again after 2 weeks on November 15th. We change the start date of the simulation to November 15th, and then extend the throughput date range to account for the work we've completed in the past 2 weeks. And let's say that the remaining scope here is 35 work items. So we started with 44, we managed to deliver 9 items in the past 2 weeks. Now we have 35 items left. What the simulation says now is that based on our performance in these past 2 weeks, the probability that comes with our initial commitment has moved to 62%, which means that we're off schedule and the work is not moving smoothly through the process. Now, if you observe that the probability of hitting your initial commitment is dropping down, this is a red flag, and you need to act accordingly in order to avoid delays. You need to continuously reevaluate your forecast and take action accordingly in order to get back on track. So after a few weeks, your release tracking dashboard will look something like this. So we still have the start date here to November 1st. Let's say that today's date is 24th of January, and then the target date is still April 19th. And here on the right side, you will see that as time passes and we keep delivering work and the remaining number of items go down, the probability of our initial commitment changes as well. So on November 15, it dropped down to 62%. 2 weeks later, on 29th of November, it actually went up to 73%. And today, 24th of January, the chance of hitting that initial target is already 95%. There are still 14 remaining tasks, but the probability of delivering on time is really, really high now. So the most important thing is to stay on top of the progress you make and ensure you take action accordingly. In this specific instance, we have an example where your project goes off track. So a solution could be to reduce your WIP limits, which would enable you to stop multitasking and focus on the outstanding work, a decision that will ultimately result in an increase of your throughput. And even if the adjustments you make don't pay off, that's okay. You've become aware of the situation, and now you can communicate it to your customers and stakeholders early so that they can react on time. Acts like this build credibility and shapes our reputation as professionals. So, to sum this up real quick, Monte Carlo simulations clearly define the risks associated with certain outcome. When it comes to planning, the conversation now moves from when will you be done to how much risk are you willing to take. If the work is easy, if you've done this before, if you don't expect any challenges along the way, go ahead and commit to the delivery date on the 70th percentile. If there are lots of unknowns, the work is complex, there are a lot of things that most probably will change, go with a higher percentile. The risk is high here. Go with the 95th percentile, go with the 98th percentile. That's the only question that you have to answer now. How much risk are you willing to take based on the work that you see in front of you? And the fact is, the Monte Carlo simulation has already provided the answer to that first question. And now it's up to us to decide the level of risk we're willing to take. We're willing to take and we're willing to live with. And using continuous forecasting will enable you to understand whether the risk you've taken is increasing or decreasing as you work through your project. The Monte Carlo simulation is there at your disposal to provide real-time feedback on whether you will make it on time or you need to adjust your course accordingly to mitigate the risk of failure. Take advantage of it. That's the most effective approach to managing realistic expectations. And here in our analytical suite, we have implemented the continuous forecasting strategy. The release tracking dashboard is exactly what you need to put a finger on the pulse of the work and make sure that you stay on schedule. And I have a very special offer for you guys to get your hands on it. And I'll tell you all about it in just a moment. Before we get there, I would like to spend just a little bit of time talking about the prerequisites to making probabilistic forecasting work in your own context. First and foremost, the question that I'm asked all the time: do we have to split our stories into even sizes to make this work? No, you don't. Remember, the forecast accounts for all the variability in your system, including the size of your work items. Now, the more interesting question is, how much data do you need to make reliable delivery predictions? What if you don't currently have any historical data? What if you have plenty of data, but you can't actually rely on it? The fact that probabilistic forecasts are based on your past performance data doesn't mean that you need a ton of data in order to come up with reliable delivery predictions. Not at all. Whether you have been collecting data from the very beginning of your board creation or you are just getting started with new teams is beside the point. The main prerequisite of producing reliable forecasts is to maintain a stable system. This is exactly what I teach in our Sustainable Predictability program. It's a 7-step roadmap to building stable delivery systems. Stable systems are delivery systems that are optimized for predictability. If your delivery system is optimized for predictability, you won't need more than 20 or 30 completed items to come up with accurate results. It's not about quantity. It's all about taking control of your management practices and ensuring that you deliver results in a consistent manner. The accuracy of your forecasts strongly depends on the stability of your system. In fact, if you don't maintain a stable system, nothing will work. If you don't take control of your management practices to enable predictable delivery results, nothing will work. There will be no approach that can give you reliable delivery predictions. You'll be better off buying a pair of dice and rolling them. You would be working with the same probability of achieving your goals. The only prerequisite to making accurate delivery forecasts is to optimize your systems for predictability. So if your data is all over the place and there is a huge gap between the percentiles on your charts, I would be thrilled to welcome you to our program and sort this out together. And if you're ready to take the next step and put everything we've talked about today into practice, you don't want to miss this out. From today till the 30th of March, I offer a spot in my program with a real-world value of over $3,000 to all annual subscribers of our analytical suite. So go to getnave.com/KCE right now. On that page, you'll be able to start your 14-day free trial for our analytics suite. And if after a couple of weeks you decide to subscribe to an annual plan, you'll get a seat in our program for free. Sustainable Predictability is really one-of-a-kind digital course I created specifically to help you build the management practices and the process policies you need to optimize your workflows for predictability. The offer is valid till the 30th of March, so don't delay. getnave.com/KCE. Go ahead, start your free trial, see a dashboard with your own data, try the probabilistic forecasting strategy. Go ahead, check the continuous forecasting features. And if you want to put your hands on our proven 7-step roadmap to building stable delivery workflows, make sure you pick an annual plan and I'll reserve a spot in the program for you. All licenses come with access to our Slack support, monthly masterclasses, live Q&A sessions, and community events, so go check it out. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you inside. getnave.com/KCE. All right, my friends, I really hope that you enjoyed this session, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, so let's get our hands up for all of those people that want to ask some questions. We've also got some in the chat. It would also be remiss of me to say other tools are available, but may not be as awesome. And you definitely cannot do that within Jira or DevOps Azure before anyone asks that question. Okay, all right then. So let's kick off with one of the ones from chat before I come to you, Craig. So Adam asked a question first, and Adam's question was, when you're looking at the throughput in the forecasting model, is that based on weekly throughput or something else?
It's based on daily throughput. It uses the daily throughput.
Daily throughput. Okay. Hopefully this answered your question, Adam. Craig, over to you.
Was that me?
Yeah. Over to you,
fantastic.
Craig.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I saw the question in the chat. It's actually my question as well. It's actually kind of a feature request, which, as you know, the scope tends, in all projects, scope tends to sort of grow over time. But when you really look back at it, most times you find it's not really growing. Our understanding is growing. And typically when we sort of capture features ahead of time, we tend to split them more, and you alluded to that in your talk, as we go along. So, for example, when it's in a FBI project I did for the US government recently, we ended up with roughly double the number of user stories that I had predicted way in the beginning. So you'd say, oh gosh, well, what does that mean for our forecasts? Throw your hands in the air. No, actually, there's hope, because the rate of this change is something we can model. and something we can predict. And if only I had a tool that knew how to do Monte Carlo simulation. Oh, but we do have a tool, which is Nave. So I'm wondering if there could be, if you have any thoughts about enhancing the tool to also predict and look at the growth in scope over time and help us out with that and tell us, oh, here's how your scope is growing or changing or even decreasing. You know, what's happening with your scope and sort of projecting that out over time.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Does it make sense?
I love the idea. Absolutely. I love the idea. It makes a lot of sense, especially when you're working in an environment where there is so much unknown. And as you mentioned, the scope explodes, like it goes like twice bigger than initially. So certainly that's something that would make a lot of sense. And I'm going to run this by the team the first thing Monday morning. So thank you so much for that suggestion. I think this is going to be like really interesting to see this in action. So if you're open, maybe we can stay in touch and actually see it with your own data, and we can actually have you in our beta phase. So you'll be the first one to check it out.
I'd love to. I actually captured it very, very carefully for this FBI project. Week by week, I have the exact growth. So I have a spreadsheet that can help,
Nice.
you know, for the, yep. Thank you.
Send me a note. I would love to see all the details.
Don't you just love it when you can hook people's dreams up? Okay, so Tomo, I think you also had a question. I think you're TL in the list. Do you want to ask it, or you want me to ask it?
It was exactly the same question with the exact same proposal. So Craig and I are right in line.
Okay, there you go. You've got a whole team working on that bad boy now, Sonya. Another question from the group. Do you use all types of work for forecasting, e.g. stories, bugs, tasks?
So this is a great question. And then my counter question is, what does your customer think about when you work out the scope with them? Do they think in terms of stories? If they think in terms of stories and you're giving them a forecast, then you have to go out and make sure that you include your stories only. If you're looking for like a forecast that you use internally for the team, then probably it makes sense only to have like tasks or subtasks as the work item types. Probably you also want to have the bugs involved. There is if you observe that in the past, there were more bugs that pop up and they represent quite a big chunk of the entire scope, probably it's worth it to also take these into account. So whatever you decide to use as an input, that's what you're going to receive as an output. So the first question is, what are you forecasting? If you're forecasting stories and you expect to come up with a forecast in the scope of stories, then you only work with stories. If you work with tasks and subtasks, then the result will be tasks and subtasks. It's really up to you to define that. Just be aware of that fact. Whatever you put in front of it, the same measurement has to be used as an output. I hope this makes sense.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another one, they're coming in fast. Can you explain the impact the filters in the tool? I wasn't fully there time any around. Are you there to explain a bit more?
Yeah, it would help if I wrote it properly. But yeah, it was, can you explain the impact of the filters in the tool? And I think you just touched on it a little bit, because we are a user of the tool now. And I've noticed that when you enable or disable some of the values in the filter, then the Monte Carlo swings left or right. So it's trying to understand what am I doing to that predictability and then give me the confidence to explain it when we're sharing it to others.
So the most important thing you have to know about the filtering system is that it filters out data points. It filters out cards. So for example, let's assume that you have 3 statuses like development, testing, deployment. If there is just one card that moved through the development phase and skipped all the rest, and then it was completed, and then if you go ahead and uncheck the development status, you're effectively filtering out all the activities associated with this card, and it is now considered invalid. So it's going to be filtered out from the scope. If you go ahead and remove tasks, all the tickets that are associated with that type, they will be filtered out from the scope. As such, you're filtering out the base, the throughput base that you work with. And as you're removing data points from the base, then the Monte Carlo simulation is going to regenerate the results again using that new base. Does this make sense?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Maybe give some advice, Sonya, about when would you actually filter out, because you wouldn't want to fill out, like if it was a one-off freak occurrence, Helen broke her leg and a project took a lot longer, God forbid, then that's a freak occurrence. That's never likely to happen again. But you don't want to be filtering out things that could happen, because that is probability that it could happen again. So what's your advice in this space?
My advice is to reduce the level of assumptions as much as you can. Like, if that's what your historical performance looks like and you don't really have a reason to filter out stuff, just do not touch the filters. Leave everything in. If you have, like, let's say, periods of people who are on a leave or holidays or non-working time, just leave it in there. Don't exclude weekends, don't exclude non-working times, don't exclude outliers. Leave them there, because these are actual use cases, these are actual scenarios that actually happened. And there is a probability of them happening again. And Monte Carlo is going to take that into account. So thank you very much for that question, Helen. I think it's really, really important one. If there isn't, you don't have a good reason to filter out stuff, just do not filter anything.
Fabulous. We've got another question from the room. Mary, take it away.
You're muted.
Wasn't so much a question, but kind of an additional answer to that previous question, where I have used filters using Monte Carlo simulations to filter into the epics, just the stories and tasks and bugs within certain epics, because we had quite a large team of engineers and we were focusing particularly on, for example, the web delivery. So we just focused on those epics and the number of people who were, delivering against that. And we just filtered, like I said, those particular stories, tasks, and so on. We didn't take out tasks or bugs or anything like that, but that's what we were predicting just against those particular deliverables.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. As long as you're aware of that impact, like you are forecasting within the epic, then that makes perfect sense.
Okay, got another question from the room from John S. He's left me an essay. Can it handle non-product-based teams, i.e. a single team producing a single product? We offer a platform of integrated services capabilities via microservices, so a mix of teams is required to deliver a product capability. Thanks in advance. Anything extra to add in there, John? A little bit of context? No? Any thoughts, Sonya, on that, what you heard so far?
Of course. So I think the question boils down to how do we organize our Kanban systems. So usually what we recommend is that you organize your boards and your Kanban systems per team. Even if you have like one team who is working on multiple projects or products, whatever the case is, we want to have one team per board. As such, every dashboard at Nave corresponds to a board. Thus, it represents the performance of that team. So it really depends on how you've organized the whole thing in your system. As long as you have like all the data within one board, then you can use Monte Carlo on that board to actually figure out if this team based on the team's performance, how they're going to behave in the future. Now, there are certain systems. I would like to give you another example that some of our customers also do use. So, for example, in Jira, every board is defined by the JQL of the board itself. The scope of the data is defined by the JQL on the board. And what some of our customers do is that they actually fetch data from different products and different teams, and then they collect that data in one board, and then they connect it to Nave. That way, the scope of the data is actually extends to multiple teams and multiple products and projects, and then they use that data to run their Monte Carlo simulations and have high-level predictions on what's possible and what's not. So I guess the answer is really like, it depends on how you've organized it in your management system, and there are different options of what's possible. If you want to look into your specific use case and really dig into your own data, please send me a note. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm inviting each and every one of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's continue the conversation. Send me a note on LinkedIn. Let's look into your specific use case, and then I can actually show you how to make this work in that specific scenario.
Brilliant. Now, the thing is with these meetup groups, Sonya, is you're pretty much preaching to the converted here, because we are all Kanbanistas and we love it and we want to try these things and we want to evolve. But life is not always that easy in organizations, is it? And so, like, how can people make that first step, not just using like Nave, but generally, how can you like get an organization to think about, actually, well, we've done estimates, then we did story points, now we want to go probabilistic. That's like, that's quite big for some organizations to take that step and convince people. What's your advice to help people in this kind of like problem?
Every time when a client comes to me and say, we're just getting started with our agility initiative, and the problem is always the same. We want to deliver results faster. We want to be more flexible. We want to be able to go out there with our results to our customers, especially when it's product-based work, like we want to deliver features quickly, to get feedback quickly, and then adjust our course accordingly. It's always the same problem. And then they are really overwhelmed. It's like, so we have to think about lead times and cycle times and throughput and probably measure flow efficiency, and it's all the data is everywhere. And how can we get started? That's the question, always. And my answer always is, regardless of where you are in your transformational journey, the first and the most important thing that I would like you to start to pay attention to is the age of your work in progress. As long as you keep track of how long your work items in progress stay in the process and try to reduce that time, you are in a perfect place. And that's the only thing that I want you to do if you're just getting started. Don't worry about Monte Carlo. Don't worry about forecasts, commitments, story points, hours, estimations. Just focus on managing the age of your work in progress. Why I'm saying this? Because all the rest of the metrics, all the rest of the features, Monte Carlo included, are results of how you manage your work. Tracking your lead time, tracking your throughput, possibly tracking your flow efficiency somehow, running all of these models to come up with reliable delivery commitments are results of how you manage the work. If you manage the work effectively, if you keep track of the age of your work items, and if you try to keep it consistent, because in our program, these are the two main things that we always get started: WIP and average age of WIP. As long as you keep these two things consistent, you will be able to produce reliable delivery forecasts in just a couple of minutes. You'll be able to stabilize your system. You'll be able to improve your lead times. You'll be able to increase your throughput. You'll become faster, more efficient, more flexible. All of these will become possible if you simply put your focus into managing your work in progress effectively. So to answer your question, if you're just getting started and it feels really overwhelming, forget about everything and just pay attention. Ideally, every single day during your daily calls, just pay attention how much time your work in progress stay in the process. And try to put the attention of your team to everything that's stayed unusually long, everything that's aging artificially, blocked work items, items that are staying and waiting and no one is doing anything about it. Everything that's accumulating waiting time in the process is your potential target. I hope this helps.